Murals by Gardner proudly presents the Airbrushed Eagle Mural Project. Beginning with a bare brick wall, typical of the walls around the Phoenix metropolitan area, and a few basic supplies such as the paints, thinned paint mixed into some old orange juice bottles, the spray gun, some spare water, trash can, paper towels, a paper roll dispenser, cone filters for filtering the paint, and the airbrush with air regulator. This is the picture that the clients gave me to work from, an eagle sitting on a branch, and this is the artwork that I gave them on their wall. To begin the project, we have to paint the sky blue. To do that, we put the cone filter into the spray gun and we pour some thinned or reduced latex paint through the cone filter. You always have to thin or filter your paint before spraying it because latex paint has a habit of forming little chunks of rubber in the can as it sits. Always clean the lip of your can as well because you're going to be using a lot of it and not all of it at one time. If the paint dries in the groove, the lid does not seal properly, there will come a time when you're going to spill the paint in the least appropriate moment. There never is an appropriate one. Okay, put the filter back in the can just to hold it. Put the lid back onto the spray gun, and we are ready to go to work. I always begin my landscapes or beach scenes with the top of the wall being painted a light blue, trying to match the light blue that we see on the horizon. If we look out at the sky in front of us, it's a different shade of blue than the darker blue above us, but we'll be looking straight ahead at the wall, similar to looking straight ahead at the horizon line. So we want that light sky blue on a wall such as this, where we have the perforations at the top of the wall. We have to pay a little extra attention, spray a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right to make sure that we get as much of the inner wall painted blue too. Your eye will be drawn to the dark spots. The process continues quickly, and it takes 2 coats. Get at least 2 coats to make it a really good looking blue wall. Once we have the 2 coats done, then the next step is to create the horizon line. For that, we're going to use white paint. But first, we have to clean out the spray gun between colors. To do that, we fill the gun with water, rinse out the excess paint, and then back pressure the blue paint that's in the gun. Put water into the spray gun, put your finger over the tip, and then pull the trigger backwards. The water will bubble up backwards into the spray gun, and we do that until it comes up clean, getting the paint out of the gun before we go to the next color. Don't always have to clean the guns if you're clever. Set up your project so that you're going from one color to the next, to the next, to the next, and they are in harmony. But if you're going from a darker color, such as a darker blue, to a lighter color, such as a pure white, you better get the blue out of there first. Alright, again, always run your paint through a cone filter. It has to be thin enough to flow, but thick enough to cover. So that's a thing that you're going to have to kind of figure out with the equipment you're using, how much air pressure you have to push the paint, how thick the paint is, and to begin with, from the manufacturer. Once I'm done, I'll usually rinse out my cone filter as well. Alright, on with the program. Now, we're going to blend the white paint into the blue paint. Starting at the bottom of the wall, we're creating that horizon fade. The blue fading into a lighter shade. So I don't want a separation of the blue and the white. I want a blend or a blur where one matches into the other, but you can't exactly pinpoint where. I wear a face mask of some sort when the wind is not breezy enough to blow the overspray away. But for now, let's get on with the clouds. Clouds are so easy to do with spray guns. If you just drift them in, remembering that as we're looking forward at the clouds, we're not looking above at the clouds above us, we are looking out at the clouds off in the distance at the horizon. They tend to appear to be flat on the bottom and fluffy on the top. I use two types of clouds, fluffy clouds, and I think they're called cirrus clouds. Anyway, they're just the more space-filling streaks that tend to fill up the sky, cover up any imperfections in the blue background, and we're going to add some gray shadowing to them later. Now it's time to blend the bottom of the wall into the backyard landscaping, which in this case is simply a dirt backyard. So I just take some earth tone brown paint and I spray the bottom of the wall to blend it into Mother Nature. The thought process that I use is to work from the furthest thing away, which is always the blue sky, to the closest thing, which is the ground at your feet, right there. So I start with the top of the wall, add the blue sky, blend it into the whiteness of the horizon, and then put the foreground, which in this case is brown, into the on top of the white horizon line. Now I have earth in front of sky, literally. It's time to add the gray shadowing to the clouds. For this I use a medium shade of gray. This is what gives them the roundness, the depth, the sense that they're not just flat white spots. They've actually got depth in 3 dimensions. It's all in the shadows. The airbrush is again ideal for stuff like this. I can put a very light coat of gray. I can stick around, put a little heavier coat of gray, and I get that whole sense of roundness out of one color of paint. With the airbrush as a tool, I have control over how much paint I apply. And now it's time to put your drawing skills to the test. This is where I take the picture the client gave me and I pencil sketch the subject onto the wall. A brick wall makes it somewhat easy because all the horizontal lines on the wall are broken into 8-inch sections, so I could divide my photograph into sections of equal distance and create a little grid for myself to work from. But I do this visually, looking at the picture, adding in the elements that I see, and it is art. It's not a photograph. You do have a bit of an artistic license. Now it's time to begin painting the eagle. I do all my background work in what I call black and white. Actually, I use a dark shade of gray. I do not use black yet. But I go on top of my pencil sketch and I begin to define my lines and I begin to add my shadowing. I'm going to save the black almost the very, very final step of the project. But everything up to that point is just basically shadowing. The neat thing about the airbrush is that out of one color or one shade, you can get lights and darks all with the amount of air, the amount you pull on the trigger allowing the paint to flow, and the distance you are from the surface that you're working on. Just dust it in lightly in the middle, get it in heavier on the outer edge, and we create that sense of roundness. I'm using the same shade of gray for my outlines as I use on the cloud that I'm now covering up. As I get in close, I define my outline by bringing the airbrush in within about a half an inch of the wall, pulling the trigger back sufficiently to let the paint flow, and moving my hand quickly, I create that outline. I lay in my defining feathers, the lead feathers or whatever, the definition of each area within the bird's wing. By constantly referring back to the original photograph, I make visual measurements of the distance between the center of the bird and the length of the wing, how many bricks wide approximately, or how many bricks up, or units, in this case 8-inch bricks. All parts of the bird are relative to the other parts of the bird. The length of the wing compared to the size of the head, the total height of the bird compared to the width of the bird. If you change one to keep it in proportion, the other ones have to change as well. Essentially, at this point, we're just creating a coloring book. We get to draw the pictures. So once we have the coloring book outlined in gray, we can continue to shadow in the various areas, creating again that sense of roundness or 3 dimensions. The airbrush is so perfectly suited for a textured surface such as a brick wall where you have some pretty deep mortar cracks and a variety of depths mixed into the actual texture of the bricks themselves. But with the airbrush, shoot that paint right down into it. Don't have to rub it in with a brush or roll it on with a paint roller. It covers the surface and goes down into those cracks and crevices all by itself. And this is where we really pick up speed. The airbrush can excel both in filling the space rapidly simply by pulling it back from the surface, pulling back on the trigger to let a maximum amount of paint out, and you can fill up a space, especially on a textured surface, so quickly. There. Well done. Now we use the airbrush for both filling in the larger areas and at the same time creating a shadowing or dark and light effect simply by going over the area multiple times or by getting the airbrush in closer to the surface. Either one will give you a darker covering of paint. Here I am simply adding it layer by layer, coming in closer if I want it darker, and moving back from the surface further, fading it at the top of the feather and making it darker at the tips. Beginning to get that three-dimensional sense of depth. Filling it in goes quickly. Perhaps not quite this quickly, but it's faster than scrubbing it with a brush. And there we have the base painted eagle. But I see a problem. The wing on the right was not quite as large as it needed to be. It was much thinner than the one on the left. So it's simple in this stage of the painting to make corrections. We haven't gone into the final covering yet, so I'm extending the wings, making them a little bit wider, and making them a little bit longer. It's okay to make mistakes, and it's easy to fix most of them if you catch them in the right stage of the game. Here we are making the wing a little bit wider and the feathers a little bit longer. That's better. Add a few details, make a few modifications, lengthen the wings. This can all be done while you're in the gray base coat stage. It's much more difficult to do after you painted the wings the correct bird color and so forth. This is a stage where you can still make modifications. Now it's time to add some color. This is where step by step it comes to life. Softly spraying the yellow paint, leaving some of the highlights of the white head show, so that gives it the sense again of a glow on the top and a shadowy effect on the bottom as the yellow paint just starts to cover into that gray base coat that I put on. So it's a layering process, and again with the airbrush you have the opportunity to go on thick or go on thin, and you can always build. Out of one shade of yellow you can get several variations within the same paint just by the amount you add from the airbrush. One of the aspects of using an airbrush that always fascinates me is that you never really touch the surface that you're working on. It could be anywhere from 1/8 of an inch to several feet distance, depending on what effect you're trying to get out of the airbrush. Here I'm using it to fill space. With the gray I was using it to outline, and then also of course to fill in the background color. Now I get in there and use it as a conventional paintbrush, but with the features of the spray, never quite touching the surface, but always adding to it. And now it's time to paint the wings. So, changing colors in the airbrush, adding in the bottle of brown paint. I now go over my gray outlines and re-emphasize what I've already done, leaving some of the gray behind, but beginning to build the color of brown. Never going for the darkest color right away, but rather building into the darkest color as we add and we add and we just add a little bit more, dusting it in, filling in the spaces gently, creating again a sense of 3 dimensions, not just a flat single color. Doing this, adding the colors on top of the gray, is literally where the subject begins to take shape. Before it was a silhouette more or less, now it's going to become an object, a 3-dimensional object. Here's again one of the best parts of the airbrush. As we layer it on, the more we put at the very tip, the darker it gets, the closer we get to the wall, the better defined the line becomes. And then we move away from the wall, same color of paint, but it just becomes lighter as we just mist it onto the surface. It's in this stage where I clean up the outer edge of my feathers, tightening them up, making them a little more precise than my gray background. And this is also where that gray background plays a very important part because it doesn't go away and we really don't cover it up. We tint it by just spraying a little bit of color on top of it and then defining, adding the details in color. Get in there real close to the surface with the airbrush and define that outer or upper edge, making it a little bit darker, adding to it all the time. And then step back with, again, the same color. Get in close, give it some definition. I'm beginning to define my feathers, filling in that large gray area now with some specific details where the feathers are going to be separated and stand out individually. Pull the trigger, step back, and flood the area. Get in close, get a thin line. I love the airbrush. It's versatile, it saves me a lot of time, and especially again on a textured surface such as brick wall, it gets the paint down into the cracks and crevices so much better than a conventional paintbrush or paint roller can do. Begin to define that curved shape of the body, shape of the legs, and there we have a good definition line. And then just pull back on, let the paint fill in the area. You can see how the gray background still plays an important part in the development of the three-dimensionality of the wing and the feathers. Now, by using the same color of brown, getting in close, we outline some of the details on the bird's feet, making the claws more definitive. And a little later here, we're going to use the same color brown to add some shadowing and that three-dimensionality to the feet themselves by just misting in a little brown. There you go. So far, with regard to the bird, we've only used three colors: gray, brown, and yellow. All the shadowing, all the depth, all the feeling of three-dimensionality is all done by the amount of color. There we go, shadowing in a little bit on the feet. Brings them into life. Still using that same color of brown, lightly outline the beak, add the nostril, shadow it a little bit, just lightly. That's the magic again of the airbrush. You can just add a light amount, or you can get in close and add a thick, heavy outline. Pull back, get a cloudy, dusting appearance. Always layering it on lightly at a time, just building the surface, building up the area. Now, to detail the eye. Give it some definition. There we have it. And now we switch to using black for the first time on this project. Black is a very powerful color. It's great for outlining. Here you can see how it defines itself away from the gray that I used on the tail feathers of the eagle. The black pops out in front of it. And now I'm using it to fill in the shadowing, give it that roundness, and also get in close and add some of the chips and the splits and the distinctive textures of the dead tree trunk. Now we get into the details, adding the shadowing, adding a little bit more definition of the darkest color we're ever going to use, which is our black. And by putting black down in depth there, we really force all the other colors to look like they're coming forward. So the black recedes into the distance, and the highlighted areas tend to come forward visually. Now we begin to shadow the face, the head, beginning with the eye. Give that some definition. Shadowing the upper part of the eye gives it that upper eyebrow. Shadowing around the eye just gives it more definition. Now for this particular project, black is the fourth color we're using on the bird. Started with gray, added the yellow, put in the brown feathers, and now we're defining it with black, giving it more shadowing and more definition. Four colors gives us a lot of three-dimensionality when you know how to shadow, highlight, and manipulate with your tools. And there we have it. The eagle has landed. Four colors against a blue sky on a brick wall. Now, the only thing left to do is to frame the painting. And for this, I use 2-inch tape to tape off my artwork and protect it from getting overspray on it when I paint the vertical pillars brick red. Using my masking paper dispenser, I quickly and efficiently cover up the area that might get some overspray on it, and taping it down so the wind doesn't blow my masking paper away. Now I'm ready to paint the pillars. Using a basic brick red color, I just give it again a base coat. Everything I do has a base coat and then a top coat to give it a multiple colored effect. After the base coat red, just kind of an overspray of a lighter brown, creating that uneven brick textured finish. Using the airbrush to define the mortar lines that are there, I used a variety of colors, in this case a darker gray. Once I have the 8-inch bricks defined, I visually divide them into half or 4-inch wide sections. And that gives me my smaller brick appearance. Once I have them defined, I now split every other one vertically in the middle, again giving me that brick image. Tear off the masking paper, and we have a finished product of an eagle framed with a red brick frame and making the client very happy. The entire project, from bringing in my equipment, setting up the compressor, the paints and everything, to drawing it out and painting it, took me about 6 hours.